So I'll jump in here and give a little intro, and then we'll get started with our workshop. So welcome. We'll be enjoying a workshop this afternoon called Growing Beneficial Herbs for Bees. And our presenters tonight are Ed and Marian Szymanski. And before we get started with their piece of the workshop, I just have a few announcements to go through. As you've probably seen, if you've attended other workshops so far in the conference, we just want to thank our sponsors each time. These folks really make this conference possible, so please make some purchases from them if you need any of the products that they offer, and please let them know how much you appreciate their support of NOFA and the NOFA Summer Conference. Another thing that we want to acknowledge with each workshop is that we are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop in various parts of the Northeast and maybe beyond on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. So we encourage everybody to take a minute to find their location on this map, and I'll drop the website into the chat if you're interested in taking a look at your area, wherever you're joining us from, and honoring the land and those whose land you occupy. So I'll put that in the chat in just a minute. As we move on into our workshop, I just want to introduce Ed and Marian. Thank you so much for joining us. Ed and Marian are homesteaders and beekeepers. They live on a 1-acre property in Franklin, Massachusetts, filled with fruit, vegetables, herbs, and flowers, and no grass. I look forward to hearing about that. They currently keep 10 colonies of honeybees and 9 chickens. Ed has served as president of Norfolk County Beekeepers Association, is the program director for Norfolk County and the Rhode Island Beekeepers Association. Ed and Marian are currently running the first of its kind intermediate level bee school for Norfolk County. Ed and Marian have made a point of finding the best plants to nourish their bees and themselves. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
So I changed the title a little bit from the original where I said growing herbs, the beneficial herbs for bees, when actually we would just talk about how the herbs benefit the people as well. So which is a win-win situation. So here's a picture of, and so the photographs that you see in this presentation are photographs that I've taken of our bees on our flowers. For the most part, there may be 1 or 2 that's not. And this is a puppy, birdseed puppies, which bees really love, and we will mention those too because they are considered to be herbs. So, oh, I can't.
Sometimes you need to click directly back on the slide in order to advance the slide when it's in full screen mode.
Oh, there we go. Okay, good, I can do it. So here's part of our yard. We have, there's our house up in the corner. We have a little freestanding greenhouse next to it. And we have another lean-to greenhouse attached to it. And here's our bee yard, which is a couple of years ago, and the hives were a little bit scattered. We've moved them closer together into sort of a central area, which will allow us to electric fence it when the bears come. We don't have trouble with bears yet, but you know, it's only a matter of time. So here's the front lawn. This is actually right out in front of our house. Everything's gardens. There are paths to walk between them, but we have, like I said, fruits and vegetables for us, and flowers for the bees, and herbs for both of us. So what bees get from flowers? How do the flowers feed bees in the first place? So the pollen that the bees collect from the plants in the process of transferring the pollen and pollinating the flowers themselves, that's the bee's protein. There are 10 amino acids that bees really need for their growth and their development. And these amino acids are found in the pollens of the plants. But there are very few plants which provide all of the proteins that the bees need, and that's the reason why it's very important that we do the diverse planting and not have, a whole field full of almond trees, if you will, or canola or whatever, that we provide a number of different flowers at any given time, all through the season, so the bees always get what they need all the time, and they will be selective about which pollens they collect, given a choice. The nectar from the plants is what the bees process into honey, and of course, people think of the beekeepers benefiting from that, but this nectar is needed by the bees as well. Nectar is basically sugar water. It's about 30% water in varying amounts of different sucrose, fructose, and glucose, which the bees do convert some of the sucrose into glucose in the hive. And there are also some organic acids that are in there, some minerals, things that you don't find in ordinary sugar. And these are all part of the bees' nutrition. This is what the bees get for their energy and what the bees need to have stored in the hive in order to survive the winter when they can't get out and forage. The bees need to have a significant amount of honey stored in their hives to get them through the winter. And then in order to feed the young bees, the bees make up a material called bee bread, which is basically just pollen that gets fermented and then has a layer of honey put over the top of it. And that's stored in the hive until they need it. And when they need to feed their young, the nurse bees, which are the younger worker bees, go and take that food, and they use it to feed the bees directly, and they also use it to manufacture royal jelly in the glands in order to feed their young as well. So it's very important that bees have both pollen and nectar available to them at all times from a wide variety of flowers. Briefly, because we could do a whole class on pollination, but in the process of pollination, let's see if my point of view, there we go. So this flower happens to be a type of, some flowers have, you have separate male and female flowers that one have the male parts, one have the female, and the pollen needs to be transferred from one flower to the other. Some flowers have both reproductive parts right in the same flower, which is the case here. So what we have here is a stamen is made up of a filament and an anther. The anther on the end here is where the pollen is stored. So this is what you see, these threads with a little hunk of pollen usually exposed around the center of the flower. Right in the center is the stigma, which is actually the repository for the pollen, and the ovule where the seed is actually formed when it gets pollinated. So down here in the base of the flower is a nectary, which is where the flower actually secretes nectar into this area in the base of the flower. And a pollinator, not just a bee, it could be a butterfly, a hummingbird, whatever, wants to come in here. The pollinator is attracted to the nectar that's secreted down here in the bottom part of the flower. So a bee would fly in and be getting down here, sticking her little proboscis down here to get the nectar up out of the bottom. And in the process of doing that, she will bump the pollen that's on the end of these anthers here and knock it into the stigma, where it will fall down in and go into making a seed. In the process of doing this, the bees, honeybees, bumblebees besides, collect the pollen. They end up with pollen all over their bodies like this. Honeybee on a St. John's wort flower. Now, one of the things you can see from this, I can't go back. Sorry. Trying to, yeah. Is as you can see right there, this straw-like thing is the proboscis, or the tongue of the bee, which is actually like a little straw, which she has inserted down into the flower to draw the nectar out of it. But in the process of doing this, she's completely covered. All the hairs on her body are covered with pollen. And she will hold on to that. This pollen's getting transferred now between the reproductive parts of the flower. But the bee now will be covered with pollen, and she will pack this pollen into a basket called a corbicula on her back legs. And she will basically comb the pollen with her front legs, comb the pollen down and pack it into the pollen baskets in her back legs to bring back to the hive. So the bee leaves the flower both with a honey stomach full of nectar, the corbicula packed with pollen to provide both types of food that they need. And also will have in the process transferred the pollen among the reproductive parts of the flower so the flower can reproduce, which is truly a win-win situation. And here, as you'll see, are honeybees returning to the hive with their little pollen baskets packed with pollen, flying in and bringing it in to store it inside the hive. That's what we look for. That's what a beekeeper goes to look for. Now, different plants are designed such that it's easy for bees to find them and easy for bees to collect the nectar and move the pollen around that they need. Now, bees like to have bright colors and like contrast in colors, bold colors, where bees can see. Bees see colors differently than we do. It's more like looking at a sort of an infrared or an ultraviolet sort of picture. And so the bright blues and purples show a lot of contrast against their surroundings, and the bees can easily find those. But other plants like this poppy here, which is a very light pastel color, if it was only this light purple color, the bees wouldn't actually be able to find it very well. So the flower, by design, has these darker purple sections in it, which basically provides the contrast for the bees to be able to find the flower and basically direct it into where the pollen is. And as you can see, these bees are having a feast here on this poppy. And poppies provide only pollen for honeybees, and they absolutely eat it up. It's also the types of flowers that are wide open. This echinacea has what you call the corolla, is the way the petals are arranged around the center of the flower. These echinacea plants have a nice, I'm pointing, nice flat petal attached to the flower in the center. And here's all the reproductive parts of the plant right there. So this makes it very easy for the bees to land right on a, that keeps happening. I better stop to right on a flat surface and get easy access to the nectar and the pollen in the center of the flower, and actually do the pollination as well. And bees will prefer those flowers that are easier for them to get the pollen and nectar from, just as we would get our food from the easiest available place. So flower design has a lot to do with it. And when you're choosing flowers for your bee gardens, it's important to take that into consideration. Oh, okay, yeah. So in the case of a comfrey flower, the nectary is deep within this flower. It's like a tube here. And the nectary is way down here in the base. And bees, shorter tongued bees like honeybees and some of your smaller bumblebees, can't get inside that flower in order to get it. And so what they've done to take advantage of this, and bumblebees especially, do this. They actually break into the side of the flower. And you can see here where the side of the flowers, they're damaged in a way. They're sort of rotting a little bit now because they've been broken into. And this honeybee here is doing the same thing. She's got her proboscis stuck into the side of the flower there. She's drawing the nectar out of there and completely bypassing the pollination process. But comfrey is a plant that does have benefits to bees and also to the garden. So it's important thing to grow. But many of your bees don't assist in the reproduction of the comfrey plants because they spring up everywhere anyhow. Now, double flowers like this poppy here, and a lot of your zinnias and dahlias have been bred, hybridized in order to make these double flowers because people like them better. For just purely for show, a lot of people think that they're prettier. It's very difficult. This poppy flower, as you can see, there's a honeybee in the center there, where I watched her for quite a few minutes, trying to find her way down inside this flower to see if she could get some pollen and nectar out of it, until finally she gave up and flew away. So double flowers like this really aren't much use in feeding pollinators. And in fact, a lot of the flowers in the process of hybridizing these flowers to make them doubles, the reproductive parts have been eliminated, so the plants are basically sterile. So we basically try to avoid them. We had planted some poppies, and it's kind of a crapshoot like whether you get singles or doubles. But I watched this poor girl's frustration trying to get into it, and it was kind of sad. So what we've done on our property is we have planted pollinator gardens in literally every available location. This is a little area at the end of our driveway, which is now developed into an area with many very tall plants, so now you can't see our bee yard from the street, which is actually beneficial. There's now Joe Pye weed, that grows 7-8 feet high. We have some 6-foot helianthus fall sunflower types, and basically took an area that had a tree and ivy overrunning it and cleared it out and made it into a pollinator garden right at the end of our driveway. Another one here, we have a lot of echinacea and blue-eyed daisies, and just basically in groups. So honeybees, and many pollinators actually, they like to work patches of flowers, because basically when a pollinator lands on a flower, the first thing she has to do is figure out how she's going to get in there and get the nectar and get the pollen from the flower. And so what they like to do is then concentrate on an area of all the same flowers. So sometimes people buy just the single plants of certain plants that they think are good bee plants and plant them in just random areas of the garden or put them in pots, and then will complain that the bees aren't going to these flowers. And it's basically because it's not worth the trouble. So a number that we've read a lot is 10 square feet, which isn't a large area. It's basically 3 by 3.5 foot, circular, rectangular, or 3-foot diameter circle to plant all of the same type. So we do want to have diverse flower types, but we want to plant them in these 10 or more square foot groupings in the same area. And you'll find that one group of bees will focus on one particular plant at any given time. Bees from another hive may be on some of the other ones in the same area, but that's what they'll focus on. So it's nice to have all of these different groupings of flowers, and I think it looks nice that way too. Here's a section in our back walkway with our greenhouse, and we have here this patch of calendula growing. I think there's some lavender up in this area here, And here's a little garden with poppies. We have a lot of our fruits and vegetables growing around there too. And these things get rotated around along the way, but basically, as you can see, every available area is being used. So this is our front yard. This was grass lawn when we bought this house 22 years ago. There was a maple tree that was losing limbs during the snowstorms and all. It was taken down in this area. So this picture was taken out of an upstairs window through a screen, and basically have this patch all over here is all echinacea. There's some bee balm over here. This is a patch of blackberries, a patch of raspberries over here. Down here we have peonies, irises, and goldenrod. We allow all of the goldenrod to come up wherever it comes up because goldenrod is a very important source of food for the bees in the fall. This area had peas that was growing in it, with cucumbers on the side. There are blueberries in here, and there are blueberries in that enclosure there. And there's basically just enough room, and peppers and pots here. And there's basically just enough room to walk around, which is really, I think, all we need. Now, on the other side of the sidewalk there that goes down to the street, and as you can see, we live on it's a pretty busy street. There are all, these are all herb gardens down here. There's like a cross of little pathways and then different types of herbs. The beans grow on these teepees over here. There are scallions over here. And then there's some wild bergamot, bee balm in there, some medicinal echinaceas in there, and then just a whole variety of herbs, thyme, rosemary, marjoram, oregano, and then we have some fruit trees over in this area here. We basically, like I said, all there is left now is room to walk around. We just build various pollinator gardens everywhere we can find a place to put them, and have an area with some sunflowers and Rebecca's and all there too. And sunflower is a very valuable flower to grow, as we'll cover pretty soon. So why herbs? We talked a lot about fruits and vegetables and a lot of flowers that we've been growing for the bees over the years. And we've come to discover, we've always grown a lot of herbs, but we've come to see how popular they are with the bees. And then we have done some looking into and found out that they're just extremely beneficial to the bees and to the pollinators. So for us, obviously, people have been using herbs in cooking and healing for centuries, and there's a lot of value in cooking with herbs and making extracts and so on to benefit our own health. But there's a lot of research that suggests that herb plants provide health benefits to the bees through their pollen and their nectar. Thymol, which is an oil that's found in the thyme plant, is actually used as a treatment for honeybees. If any beekeepers in the audience would know that it's a treatment for varroa mites. And I like to think that the bees can get some of that directly from the pollen and nectar from the thyme plants. So this Erler and Moritz had done some research and found that honeybees will actually preferentially forage for plants, for flowers whose pollen and nectar has antimicrobial qualities, especially if the bees happen to be sick or bees having health issues of their own. That bees will seek out flowers. They did a lot of work with sunflowers to find that bees that are ailing will preferentially go to the sunflowers above all others in order to get beneficial pollen and nectar from them. I don't think I can pronounce this very well, but this we just read, I was just reading in one of the books that we will recommend in our reading list at the end, which is called Victory Gardens for Bees, written by Laurie Wiedenhammer. She mentioned this Juliette de Baraclay-Levy, a French woman who wrote this book called The Complete Herbal Handbook for Farm and Stable. And what she had found and what she wrote about was that bees, she says that bees are skilled at treating themselves, especially when they need it. And they benefit from the herb nectar and pollen. And she also found that honey from the herbs has benefits both to the bees and to the humans. And they also did some work to find, and which I can prove just by going out in my backyard, is that bees love the aromatic herbs, like in the mint family. We have a lot of mint here. We have mountain mints, which we'll go to talk about. Bees are all over. And also she found that borage plants, which are nice and they're actually edible flowers, but we don't eat them because we leave them for the bees. But the borage plants provide a lot of nectar for the bees. And borage are the annuals, but every year we plant a lot, and you can actually do multiple plantings of borage during the year. And bees, they get a lot of nectar out of those. Ashley Adamant, who maintains a website called practicalselfreliance.com, said of herbs that you grow herbs to help the bees and to heal yourself, which I think is really, really a nice thing. So I thought about this as we were working on that, all right, and as I look around our yard, that we grow a lot of vegetables basically for our own benefit, peppers and tomatoes and cucumbers and all these different things. And we grow a lot of flowers specifically for the bees to forage on. But really, when you grow herbs, that actually benefits both at the same time. So we're looking at actually expanding our herb plantings as we go along here. All we need to do is find space to put them. So a lot of the research that has been done has found that there are certain compounds in the pollen and nectar, which are these secondary metabolites, they're called. They're chemical compounds that are found in the pollen and the nectar, more so the pollen, carbachol, thymol, and other materials that fall into the terpenes family of chemicals, which are antimicrobial and antibacterial, which can do a lot for helping the bees to stay healthy. Any beekeepers will know that there's a bacterial disease called European foul brood, which is pretty nasty and can really take a toll on a hive and can actually be spread around too. That these secondary metabolites that are found in these plants like thyme and turtle heads, sunflowers, and dogbane, what those are, that these all can help fight against European foul brood. And I will say, I can't prove it one way or the other, but we have seen instances in talking to the state bee inspectors. European foul brood, comes around every year, that they do find it around in this area. And 11 years of having bees with all of these gardens and herbs, we have never had European foul brood in any of our hives. So could be something there. Other materials like these palmitic, linoleic, and linolenic acids are, once again, they're found in the plants like borage, sage, thyme, chamomile, sunflowers, all have antibacterial properties and all provide health benefits to bees as well as to people. Besides that, you can make a a bee tea, which we actually made some of today on a hive that was a little short on food that needed to be fed, where you basically just make a tea. There are recipes that you can find online using a number of different herbs. But basically, if you can get some sage, some thyme, some chamomile, and basically just, immerse it in hot water to make sort of a tea out of it, and then add it to sugar syrup when you're feeding your bees in the winter or in the spring, it really helps to clean out the bees' gut. There's another disease that affects honeybees called nosema. There's actually two different types of nosema. One of them which used to be treated with an antibiotic that isn't available anymore. But it's a spore type bacteria that lives in the gut of the bees. And under certain conditions, the spores break open and multiply, and they can make the bees very ill. And it basically causes a dysentery where the bees soil the inside of their hives. And one of the problems with that nosema causes is that it makes the bees disinterested in going out and foraging for food. So the bees don't go out, they're sick, they don't bring any food in, they're not bringing in any of these healing things that they might possibly bring in. And the hives can actually deteriorate very quickly, especially over the winter when they're trapped inside and it's cool and damp inside. So by having the bees, having the herbs growing on your property to the bees to forage from, they maintain healthy conditions within their gut. And also feeding them in the spring and the fall with this bee tea helps to maintain healthy conditions. And the nosema spores, which are always present, but they never actually get out of control. So it's a good thing, a very good thing to look into doing. And it's that way there it's a more natural thing rather than using chemical type materials instead. So, and the other thing I wanted to mention too, as far as the things that you grow, that both comfrey and calendula, you can smash up the leaves in your hands and rub it on bee stings. And it takes away some of the pain and swelling of bee stings. So again, if you're growing these things in your yard and everybody gets stung when they're inspecting their beehives, it just helps to heal us from the bee stings too, and it's just another benefit. So now what we'd like to do is to go through herbs, and what I have here is basically is a photograph that I've taken of the flower with the bees on it, and we have a little bit information of the common name, the Latin name, what type of plant growing habit it has, when they bloom, which, bloom times vary, and they seem to be changing a little bit over with our climate changing. Color of the pollen is interesting to me, interesting to some beekeepers, so that you can see what's coming in the hive and get an idea of where it's coming from, and also a notation as to whether they provide primarily nectar or pollen or both to the bees.
So this plant is Angelica. It's used a lot in Chinese medicine. We don't use it so much in this country, but some herbalists are learning about how important it is. For humans, it can treat fever, infection, and flu. But for bees, it contains a lot of those secondary metabolites, so they seem to go to it quite frequently. When it's in bloom, it's usually covered with honeybees. This is Anise hyssop. This is a really beautiful flowering herb. It is loved by pollinators, native bees, bumblebees, honeybees, butterflies. They're usually just, in fact, they're blooming right now, and they are just covered with pollinators. For human beings, they can be used to treat wounds and infections. It's in the mint family, so it has a lot of the same healing properties that mints have for the honeybees as well. This is allium. This is an ornamental plant. We don't actually use this in any of the healing preparations that I make, but the bees love it, and it definitely is in the family of the onions and scallions and such. When it's blooming, the bees are just all over it. This is an onion that's been allowed to go to flower. Again, very popular with the bees. And this is a scallion. When our scallions go to flower, the bees are covering it. For humans, scallions help to lower cholesterol. They can be an antibiotic. Bees seem to turn to them also when they're looking for ways of treating microbes that they have, they don't wish to have in their guts. This is a barberry plant. It's a pretty common shrub. It can be invasive. We haven't found it to be in our yard, but some people do find it to be that. The flowers are very tiny and very, very hard to notice. People use barberry for treating skin ailments and GI issues. The bees are very intent on getting the nectar out of these. When the barberries are blooming, you see a lot of honeybees and bumblebees on them. This is a Thai basil. Bees love the flowers on basils, and we usually let ours go to flower instead of pinching off the flowers like most people do when they grow basil. We still get a really good basil harvest, enough for me to dry and save for over the winter, enough for us to use fresh. But the bees really get a lot of goodness out of the basil flowers as well. This is bee balm. Some of the honeybees are able to feed on these, but most often we see bumblebees on these. Butterflies also I see on these, and oftentimes a hummingbird or two will be on those as well. This is borage, like Ed was talking about a little while ago. Borage has been studied by scientists, and it's found to contain a lot of positive nutrients and medicinals for honeybees. The flowers actually and the leaves taste a little bit like cucumbers. They're delicious. People use them as a general tonic, strengthen their overall health. The bramble family, raspberries and blackberries are very, very popular with the bees. Honeybees, native bees, the big bumblebees. This is one of our raspberry patches. We have 3 or 4 big patches of raspberries throughout our yard. For humans, they're especially good for women's health, women's reproductive system. They're also very rich in antioxidants. These are blackberries. Some of our blackberries flower with white flowers, some with purple flowers. Those are also really good for human beings. The blackberry leaves are great for any GI distress you're experiencing. The bees are obviously getting something really good from it. It's one of the bigger components, I think, of our honey, of the blackberry and raspberry nectars. This is calendula. You can grow the medicinal calendula either yellow or orange. Both seem to have equally helpful benefits for humans, especially in treating wounds and in skin problems. But again, honeybees and native bees really, really like the pollen from this.
So calendula, a very late bloomer. As you see this picture here, I actually took on the 17th of November. And we've actually since then seen on a warm enough day, if it's 50 degrees or so, even in December, the bees will actually get out of the hive. And in most cases, there's no food for them available. But we've had calendula, we've had bees foraging pollen from calendula flowers in December.
This is catmint. This is one of the earliest things to bloom in our yard, one of the earliest herbs. It blooms right after the bulbs, and even while some of the bulbs are still blooming. It's a perennial. It spreads a bit, not terribly. It's very, very easy to start from seed, though, especially the variety called Faasans, Faasans. For humans, it's good for treating anxiety and depression. For bees, it seems to contain a lot of those metabolites, secondary metabolites, that the bees actually store in the hive as their pollen and in their nectar, and they seem to actually be feeding any diseased young or other diseased nestmates pollen and nectar from these. And scientists have theorized that they're deliberately treating disease that they've discovered in the hive. This is comfrey. This is the one that Ed showed you. They sort of steal the nectar out of without actually going through these steps of helping the plant to reproduce. Comfrey is used more in topical treatments in people nowadays. There's been some concern about liver damage in taking it orally, although some herbalists are still saying that that's not that much of a risk and it's worth it. But the honeybees are all over the comfrey flowers when they're in bloom. They'll choose this over other much more showier plants. This will be their go-to. Dahlias are actually considered an herb, although I've never ingested one. We do grow a type of dahlia called Bishop's Children. It's a single flowering plant. It does not have double rows of petals, which makes it much easier for the bees to get to the pollen. It is used in for people who are diabetic. The starches and the tubers contain inulin, which is actually a pretty healthy starch for people who are diabetic. For the honeybees, what it does is it blooms very late in the year. It doesn't start blooming until late August, and it blooms right through October. That's a time, oftentimes, when honeybees and, well, all native bees, all other bees, including native bees, have trouble finding a lot of forage at that time. So this is a really great plant to have. We plant a lot of it. I save the tubers every year, and then in the spring I plant another 100 or so of the plants from seed. They start very easily from seed. And we just have many, many garden beds filled with these dahlias. The Bishop's Children are nice because they come up in all different colors. There's reds and salmons and lavenders and whites and mixtures of all of those colors. It's a really great thing to have for the bees at a time of year when there's often a dearth. These are echinaceas, also called coneflower, although nowadays they're not just purple coneflowers, they come in a lot of different colors. This is probably one of the most common plants we grow. We have hundreds and hundreds of echinacea on our property. We have some gardens that are just all echinacea plants. And this time of year, when a lot of the big nectar-producing plants are done for the year, this is what our bees are on right now. They're on them by the hundreds. This is another picture of an echinacea. The hybrid varieties like this one seem to be just as popular as the more native purple ones. The bees don't seem to care that much. Here's elderberry. If you don't have a big yard, but you want to grow a lot of herbs for your bees and for yourself, elderberry is a really good one to grow. It produces a lot of flowers, great big umbels of beautiful white flowers that turn into purple berries, which are very healing to people. Herbal companies right now are unable to keep elderberries in stock because so many people have bought them because it's thought to potentially treat COVID-19 infections. It is very good at treating other flu-like illnesses, other upper respiratory illnesses, and a lot of herb companies are having a hard time keeping this in stock. So it's best to grow your own. It's good for the bees and it's good for you. This is a wild ground cover. I don't know if it's native. It could very well be from Europe. It can act a little bit invasive, but it's very small, very short to the ground, and its roots are very, very shallow, so it's easy to pull up if it comes up where you don't want it. It's also called ground ivy. We call it gill over the ground. It blooms in April and May at a time when very few plants are beginning to flower. Some of the bulbs are kind of going by at that time, and some of the bigger sources of nectar and pollen are not really in bloom yet. So although the plants are very small, there's so many of them that they really do give the bees a decent amount of nectar and pollen. For people, it's used to treat bronchitis, which is also really useful and helpful for all of us. This is goldenrod. Like Ed said, this is a great plant to have because it blooms so late in the year. Goldenrod honey is delicious. It's a dark, dark, dark brown. It almost looks like oil for your car. It's such a dark, almost black color, but it's really rich. Goldenrod itself is useful in people in treating allergies, especially cat allergies. But the bees are very, very attracted to it and bring a lot of this nectar and a lot of this pollen back to their hives. This is a hawthorn berry tree. This is another thing that's great to plant if you don't have a very big yard, but you want to plant some medicinals for the bees. In human beings, hawthorn has been used for centuries to help to heal and strengthen cardiovascular systems. The bees are all over the flowers when they're blooming. They're in the rose family, so they're very pretty and they have a lovely scent as well. This is lemon balm. It's in the mint family. It does self-seed all over your yard, so you have to be kind of vigilant if you don't want it in certain places. Just pull it up and just kind of keep an eye on it. But in some parts of our yard where we don't really have a lot else growing, the lemon balm is a nice thing to grow. Little tiny white flowers that aren't particularly showy in a single plant, but we have masses of the plant together. It's really pretty. This is a linden, again, another tree that would be great to plant if you have a small yard and you want to plant medicinals. It's one of the earlier things that bloom for the bees. It's usually in June. I wouldn't say it goes until August typically, but it's usually in June, the lindens. Landscapers are starting to use it more and more, so our bees are having more and more access to it. The honey from it has a little bit of a mint taste, which is nice. A lot of herbalists use it in tea mixtures. It has properties that are said to reduce stress and anxiety, which we could probably all use about now.
Apologize for the description there. It's not, Janice does not time us at all. I had copied a slide and didn't fill in the details. Linden trees bloom basically June, July. And pretty much they're a very good source of nectar for the bees at that time.
This is lungwort. It blooms really early in the spring. A lot of different types of bees are seen on it. Bumblebees and honeybees the most in our yard, but I've seen tiny native bees on it as well. Blooms really early, April to May. It's in shades of blue and purple and hot pink. It's said in humans to treat lung ailments, which is why the name lungwort, I guess, was given to it. This is mountain mint. This is blooming in our yard right now, and this is where probably the most bees are on of all the things growing in our yard right now. It's a pretty tall mint. It doesn't spread like other mints do. It will seed near where the original plant is, but not outrageously so. Gets to be about 2 to 3 feet tall. Here's a little video Ed made of them on it. You can see they're just really loving getting the nectar and pollen from this plant. I fill huge pots, like 2 foot or 3 foot across, with these, and just place them out in the shadier parts of our yard. And right now there are bees all over all of these in our yard. In human beings, the plant, like all of the mints, is said to be calming and strengthening, helps with stress, anxiety. This is oregano. It's a culinary herb. Flowers in both pinks and whites. Ours is typically white. That's also flowering right now, and that is also very, very popular in our yard right now. It's great for obviously for flavoring food, especially in Italian meals. It's also really good for treating respiratory issues. A tea made out of oregano is said to be antiviral, and it also helps if you have a cough, especially a deep, loose cough. It's actually a pretty good tasting tea as well, especially with some honey in it. These are the breadseed poppies, or they're actually opium poppies. They're very, very frequently visited by the bees for their pollen. In herbal medicines, the poppies are also used as painkillers and as sedatives, mild sedatives. This is a saffron crocus. This crocus, you plant it in the fall, but it doesn't bloom until the following fall. So it's a nice source of nectar and pollen for the bees at a time when there's not a lot. It blooms September through October, and planted in big masses, it actually becomes a really good source of nectar for the bees. In people, saffron has been shown to be a powerful antioxidant. And the nice thing about growing your own is that you can actually afford to have saffron occasionally, because it's a very expensive herb to buy. This is St. John's wort. It's used to treat anxiety and depression. in human beings. Very, very loaded with pollen for the bees. They'll come back to the hive with their honey basket, their pollen basket, excuse me, just filled with this rich yellow pollen. Sunflowers. Sunflowers are really high in the secondary metabolites. Some researchers found that sunflower pollen helped reduce the parasite load in bees by 61 to 81%, which is huge. Bees who are known to be ill with or loaded or infested with microbes are seen to choose sunflower pollen over all other pollens available to them at that time. They're also a nice flower for people to grow, and I have become interested in natural botanical dyeing, and I'm growing some Hopi black seed pollen sunflowers right now, and I expect to see bees all over them very soon. This is a thyme plant. This is a really important one to plant for bees. If you were going to plant just one or two plants for bees, this would be one of the two, I think. It's a low-growing plant. The German and the English thyme are probably the two hardiest, although sometimes in a really cold winter, we can lose a lot of them. They do seem to come back pretty fast. They bounce back very quickly. This is wild bergamot. This is, actually, this is not wild bergamot. This is bee balm. Although there's the wild bergamot. That was beloved by honeybees and bumblebees and a number of small native bees this year. Some of them I don't even know the names of. We planted a huge grouping of them, and they were just beloved by bees. They're actually good for people too. They help, the leaves of the wild bergamot and the dry flowers help a lot with digestive issues caused by anxiety, which again, we should probably all stock up on right about now. This is witch hazel. This is the type that blooms in the very early spring. It blooms before most bulbs are even up and blooming. It's one of the first nectar and pollen sources, mostly pollen sources that we have for our bees in our yard. Witch hazel also has a lot of really good things for people. It treats skin problems, and it's been shown to protect against cancer. Some studies are going on right now that have been very promising in protecting against colon cancer. It's just really a nice plant to have in the springtime too, because it's so beautiful and just so nice to see some color coming up in the yard. Sometimes there's still snow on the ground, but the witch hazel will begin to bloom at that time.
And the thing is that you can have a case where you've got early bulbs, crocuses and snowdrops and things that are up and blooming, and then you get a snowstorm, you know, we can get 6 inches of snow, and then the next day it could be 50 degrees and sunny. And the bulb plants are all still underneath the snow, and the bees can't get to them. But your witch hazels are blooming well above ground, so they're not affected by that. So I would actually go as far as say that it's more important to have witch hazel plants than it is to some of the early bulbs, depending on how our weather conditions go in our springtimes.
This is the witch hazel that blooms in the fall. It's one of the very last things to bloom in this part of the country and during the growing year. It blooms from October until December. So it's a really nice plant to have. We've been having these longer, warmer falls lately. This is great to have a grouping, I would say, of witch hazels. This type, the type that blooms in the fall, is almost always yellow, but it's still just a beautiful color to have that time of year in your yard. This is yarrow. The medicinal yarrow is typically white. You can buy hybrids that are more brightly colored, but I have found that over the years, they come up more and more pale each year until ultimately they're back to the white color. Honeybees and bumblebees especially like this. A lot of the tiny native plants like yarrow, and butterflies really love it. I have seen hummingbirds on the brighter pink ones before. People use it as an astringent. It's been used to help with bleeding, to help stop bleeding from a wound of any sort. It's a very drying type of plant. It's beautiful, and it will self-seed. It will come up reliably on its own, but it does tend to self-seed. So in a wildflower garden, yarrow was a really nice thing to add to it.
So here's just a couple of suppliers that you can get seeds from. We basically will buy seeds from any of the seed suppliers that have taken the Safe Seed Pledge, in which they promise to not treat the seeds with systemic pesticides and to grow them using responsible methods. We really like Hudson Valley Seed Company, Baker Creek, but we'll buy from all of these. We usually spend New Year's Day picking out our seeds from all the catalogs and ordering them. It's a little ritual of ours, but and there's some others out there. But basically, when we find out about a new seed company, we take a look to see if they have taken the Safe Seed Pledge. Otherwise, we won't buy from them. It's very important to not. What? Why? Okay, and then here's some books that we use. As I mentioned before, there's Victory Gardens for Bees. It's probably our favorite bee planting book, and I think we do have them all. I don't know. There's a 20-page section on herbs in this book. It has a lot of good information, a lot of the information along the lines of what we've presented today. 100 Plants to Feed the Bees, which is published by Xerces Society, is also good as just a plant by plant, and it's literally numbered 1 through 100 of plants that you can buy to feed pollinators with. And there's just basically 2 pages on every one of them to describe them and what they do for the bees and pictures of them and so on. This Pollinator Friendly Gardening by Rhonda Hayes, a little bit more general for pollinators, rather than bees themselves, but just has information about planting gardens too, as does Maureen Little's book, Planting a Bee Garden. And hers has goes into a lot of design. She'll emphasize that, like we said, about planting groups of the same type of flower. Take a large area and break it up into sections and plant a 10 or more square foot section of each one of them. And she's got a lot of different designs for pollinator gardens, for different light conditions, different soil conditions, different water conditions. So any of these books we highly recommend. And that's the end of the show. So we have allowed some time for questions. If people have some questions, I think we have had a couple in the chat.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I really, that was very informative and also beautiful. I don't know if you mentioned that you're also a photographer. I saw that in your bio. So in addition to being very informative, I really enjoyed the photography.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions in the chat, and I also have some questions, but also questions from the chat. So Deb had a couple questions, but I think you answered the first question. Deb was wondering about where you purchase seeds or bulbs, and you mentioned some seed companies. Do those also offer bulbs, or are there other places one would look for bulbs?
Yes, Hudson Valley offers bulbs. I don't think Baker's Creek does.
No, we've had bulbs from Bluestone Perennials, American Meadows, John Sheepers,
Okay.
which, because we've recently discovered all of the different varieties of alliums that there are, and we've kind of gone wild with that. So we found a lot of these companies that sell the allium bulbs, and we have quite a few orders placed right now for bulbs. White Flower Farm is another one. They're in Connecticut. And under different conditions, you can drive down there and visit the place too. And then, yeah, like I said, the seeds I see she also mentioned about herbs for shade.
Oh, oh, mints are wonderful for shade. Mints are great. The lemon balms also will grow in almost full shade too. We just heard about another one, dragon, what was it called? Dragon head?
Dragon head.
Dragon head. We don't have it, but one of the companies that we put on the list, Baker's Creek, does carry seed for it. They use it in Italy a lot for as another way of growing something with a lemony, minty taste. Kind of like a lemon balm, but the flowers are purple and showier. And that's also would grow in the shade.
So another question here from Deb. Are there some groups of herbs that work better together?
I think if you're going to grow herbs for culinary purposes, it's good to grow them with other culinary herbs. I kind of have my medicinal beds and then the herb culinary beds. I don't usually mix them together because sometimes I don't really want to accidentally pick some that I don't really think I should be eating in that form. But any of the herbs that are used traditionally in Italian cooking are really good together, like the rosemaries, the sages, the basils. All of that's really good all together, I think.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I really liked the visual where you had clumps of certain types. And when I first saw the echinacea, I guess I haven't seen all the different colors of echinacea. I just think of it as a purple,
No.
you know, the purple cone flower. And maybe I've seen the sort of reddish orange one, but I had no idea. So at first I was looking at it thinking, no, that looks like a whole bunch of different types. And then I looked closer and I thought, no, those must all be echinacea, but they're many different colors.
Yeah, we've discovered a lot of, there are many varieties. And if you look at some of these companies like Bluestone Perennials or White Flower Farm, you can see them in the catalogs, and they seem to come out with more every year. And I had recently posted a picture on Facebook in our bee clubs they had honeybees on some echinacea, and quite a few people suddenly realized that you can buy yellow echinaceas, that they had no idea.
Yeah, I had no idea. That's great.
So they come yellow, anywhere from white to yellow to pink, red, you know, hot pink, orange. I guess blues are the only things you don't see.
Yeah.
You know, once you get to the purple color, but and bees don't really seem to care. And one of the things we've noticed in some of our patches, because I spend some time watching bees forage sometimes, is that if you have multiple colors in the same group, the bees will forage on any of them. In other words, they don't, like I said about bees being specific to a patch of flowers, all the echinaceas will be foraged at the same time regardless of color. So you can really mix and match that way.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So Kathy's comment here, first of all, that you gave a great presentation.
Thank you.
And also you mentioned thyme might be one of the most, thyme might be one of the most beneficial herbs to plant. What other plants are up there? I know there are a couple times when you said if you only do a couple things, here's what they are. So I don't know if you want to just mention what are the most beneficial herbs?
Sure.
I think top of the list.
I think the catmint is one of the most beneficial, mostly because it's one of the first things the bees have to forage on when they're coming out of the winter. At that time, they don't have a lot of stores left. They've eaten much of their honey. They've gone through a lot of their pollen, but they are already starting to raise babies at that point. So I think the catmint is very healing. I think mints in general are really good. I think the apple mint is one of the best ones because it has a very big flower spike, so the bees can get a lot of food from each plant. I think the mountain mint is really important. Just judging by what the bees choose to go to, when there's a lot of things available, they'll choose the mountain mint over most anything else. But I think that oregano and thyme are also really important. Again, just because of the health benefits we know are for humans from those plants, I can't help but think the bees aren't getting equally good components from those plants.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. So there's a question from Wes. And Wes, if you want to jump in and expand on this, feel free. I'll just read what's down here. It says, would some of these herbs help protect bees from pesticide use? My family keeps bees in the suburbs and have had issues with neighbors excessively spraying for ticks and mosquitoes.
We seem to have seen a lot of that lately.
So, Wes, if you want to chime in and add anything else, or if you guys want to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the things the scientists are looking at when they're looking at what the honeybees are choosing to feed on as far as the herbs go is whether or not these secondary metabolites and other resins and pigments can help break down the pesticides that the bees encounter. And there is some early evidence that it does, but I haven't read anything about what specific plants to plant as far as helping the bees with that yet. I would say if you're going to try to help them, to plant a wide variety of herbs and give them the choice of what they're going to go to. They do definitely go to plants for medicinal purposes when they know they need it. I think if you plant a really complex herb garden with large amounts of each of the different plants and make all that available to them, I think that they will be able to medicate themselves when they know they need it.
So there have been a lot of issues with spraying lately. People seem to be doing more and more, hiring companies to spray. And we do hear about bee kills in various areas, usually in suburban neighborhoods where they're coming in and spraying, and some of the applicators aren't careful about what they do. And so we can't really say that anything in particular would fight off pesticide poisoning, but I think it's an overall health thing. I think, I always say that there are three things that we have to worry about in the health of our bees, and that being, food. We don't have to really worry about honeybees, don't have to worry about habitat in such a way as that we provide housing for them, but nutrition for the bees, and having good flower sources around. And then there's the internal diseases and afflictions that the bees have, like the varroa mites and the bacterial infections and all. And then there's pesticide use. And these things are all tied together as a general health thing. So that by providing all of this good forage for all the bees, like Marian said, a bunch of different herbs, that the bees are the healthiest possible condition, will help them to be able to fight off a pesticide poisoning or like our other diseases too. So it's just all about the overall health of the bees. I think that's where we can say we get the benefits. A mass spraying of something that a lot of the bees get into, I don't know if anything's going to save them, but we need to just keep the health of our bees up at all times. And for us, it's paid off. Our winter survival rates are extremely high, well above the averages, and we've never had an issue with some of the bacterials, and we've never had an issue with any pesticide issues either. So I just think we want to just have healthy bees. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, that sounds like a good rule of thumb. Thank you. Do you guys or anybody else have anything along those lines? I have a couple of other questions that are not related, but if anybody wants to chime in. So one of my questions as I was going through, I was trying to catalog in my head as I looked at the pictures of your yard, which of those plants are annuals, which of those plants are perennials, which are wild, which are cultivated. Do you have a sense of like how much of the plants that you have kind of fall into those different categories and require, yearly replanting and maintenance and all that?
I think probably we've gone to mostly perennials at this point. And we try to stagger it so that we have something blooming at all times. We don't do a lot. I mean, I do some annuals, but I don't do a lot because it's very labor intensive to plant them and grow them in our greenhouses and then put them out and have them only go through that one season. If I do plant annuals, we do tend to plant for the ones that will come up on their own the next year, like they will self-seed. Like the Chinese forget-me-nots are a really great annual because once you planted them, you'll keep getting them for years, and the honeybees go crazy over them. And they also bring back blue pollen, which I think looks really cool in the hives. I think, what are the annuals? We plant cosmos sometimes because, again, the bees really like them, and those can be hit by a light frost and still keep going. So I think it's worth our while to plant those. I plant calendula as an annual, but those will also sometimes self-seed for us. But much of what we plant, I would say, is perennial. We do plant a lot of bulbs too. Another place I thought of to get really good bulbs is Fedco. We've gotten a lot of bulbs from there over the years. And some bulbs also have herbal properties, like snowdrops actually have a lot of herbal properties. And that's one of the very first things to come up and bloom for the bees. Some research is showing that snowdrops actually have a chemical in them that may help prevent or treat Alzheimer's. There's a lot of research being done on that plant right now, which is nice to think of. Something in your garden could be helpful.
Oh, interesting. And along those lines, it seems like, I mean, you've got such a beautiful variety and such a rich diversity of all these different herbs and flowers and vegetables in your yard. And then part of me feels like, oh, that's a little overwhelmed. How would you compare that to sort of the average lawn maintenance for, you know, a lot of your size for, you know, people who do mowing and, you know, putting down, you know, other things on their lawn? Like, do you think it's comparable? Do you think it's more or less work?
I think it's probably more work in the beginning to establish the beds, to create the beds. But once the beds are going, I mean, you do have to go out and weed periodically, but if you mulch, there's not as much weeding. I think eventually there's less work involved, and it's certainly more pleasant work. I mean, to me, going out and pushing a lawnmower around the yard is not a lot of fun, but going out and spending time in an herb garden, I think is really pleasurable. So, although you'll put work in the beginning, I think it's well worth it.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to read a few of the comments and then see if other folks have questions. So let's see. Deb, no, this is not Deb. Hold on. Oh yeah, Deb says, thanks so much for your beautiful photos. And another person whose name I can't see says, I can't wait to plant some of these plants in my yard. I love the dual purpose for herbs, which I was thinking too. And I like that you retitled your workshop. I like that addition. Wes says, my borage seems to reseed every year, even though it's an annual. Can you speak to irrigation in your setup? How much watering do you need to do with no lawn and all flowers?
Well, right now we're doing quite a bit. I mean, this shortage of rain here is bad. And we do grow a lot of vegetables too, you know, like peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, things like that, that do need water. We don't have irrigation systems. We have a very interesting lot, if you see it, because of the grade. It's not that it's just multiple areas at slightly different elevations. So there are walkways and paths between different things, and basically gets hand watered. And one of the things we found is that our town, in times of when water is short, like now, will ban any sort of lawn watering with sprinklers and all, but they do allow hand watering of gardens, especially vegetable gardens. So we can do that. And the other thing is we collect rainwater. Our house didn't have any gutters at all when we bought it. It didn't really need them by design, but I ended up putting gutters on the house in order to have rain barrels. And we have 9 rain barrels in different locations. I even have a gutter and rain barrels on our chickens pen, run. It has a roof and gutters on it, and multiple rain barrels that at different levels so that one overflows into the next one. So we can store probably over 400 gallons of water. And then, of course, that needs to be watered by watering cans, so it just depends, different years, and the rain conditions. At the moment, we're doing quite a bit of watering. But no, probably not any different than people watering their lawns, except that we're actually getting something out of it.
Right. Yeah, and I guess going back to what you're getting out of it, so you were talking about various vegetables that you let go to flower, and I might choose that. You like look at your onions and think like, okay, these 5 onions I'm going to harvest, and these 5 I'm going to let go to flower. Or do you just kind of let it happen?
Actually, even when they go to flower, you can still get a harvest, we find. Like the scallions, the evergreen scallions, I think they're Japanese bunching scallions, they're called. We still get just as much harvest whether we let them go to flower or not, it seems. And then, of course, we get seeds from the flowers when they're done flowering. And so we're able to just replant in other areas if we want. The basils, I think we get just as many basil leaves as we do as if we picked off the blossoms. I never really noticed a big difference. We're able to make pesto and to dry, many, many mason jars full of basil. So I don't really see a big difference in the harvest, but I do see the bees all over the flowers, which I like to see. Yeah,
it's good to know. Yeah, I spend a lot of time worrying about picking off those flowers in my basil, so I'll chill out about that now. So the next question is maybe overlapping your bee and herbal world with your photography world. Deb is wondering, are the photos of your garden beds available for download?
Well, not to download, I guess, where, I could make some of the garden beds photos available. I don't do all of the individual photos from the presentation because I also do some side business with selling photographs. But what I'll do is I can put email address. Yeah, setting a blog would be a good idea if I only had time for that between teaching beekeeping classes and all. But I'll put my email address in the chat, and if you want to write and ask, I could make some pictures available of the general garden and bed photos for sure. And any other questions you might have.
Great. So I have a couple other questions and some announcements before we wrap up, but I want to give other folks a chance to jump in and ask any follow-up questions or anything else you might have in mind. Deb says thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So I have a question on the consumer end of things. I've done some herb gardening, flower gardening, vegetable gardening, but I am not a beekeeper myself. And one thing I notice is they advertise like honey or something like that that's very specific. And as you talk about like having a more diverse range of plants for bees, it seems like that's actually not such a great thing to be looking for just red clover honey or just something that's any one type of flower. Could you speak to that and what that means in terms of the health properties of the honey or the health properties for the bees and how that affects their lives?
Well, a lot of times when a honey producer says that they're selling cranberry honey or they're selling blueberry honey, it's because those hives have been put on trucks and moved to areas where that's what's blooming. Like apples, a lot of times in the spring, those, they'll put 20 hives in an apple orchard, and that's all that the bees can get. So that honey really is going to be just from apple blossoms. If all the bees ever had was apple blossoms, that wouldn't be a really great diet for them. They wouldn't be able to get everything they need. But we're not migratory beekeepers in that way. We plant a lot of different things. I best only really call ours would be like wildflower honey, I suppose, because it's so many different things. I like the taste of that kind of honey better myself. I like being able to taste differences from one jar to the next and wonder what went into those. But what do they say? It takes 2 million blossoms to make one jar of honey. So who knows what goes into our honeys?
Yeah.
So we see through the year, if we harvest, there are different times as the boxes, that the bees store the honey in get filled up. You try to get it off and get it back on so they can keep filling more. And so we can line up honey jars for different extractions that we've done through the year, and you can see there's a color change that goes. So the very early honey is almost water white. I mean, it just has a little bit of a tint to it. And that's honey that comes from the things that bloom in the earliest, like the berries, the raspberries and the blackberries, black locust trees, which these just flock to. It's all very light colored honey. And then the next phase, you have like the sumac and the lindens and some of the early perennials that start, and that gets a little bit darker, more of an amber color. And then later in the year, you have things like Japanese knotweed and goldenrod, and a purple loosestrife makes a very dark honey too. So your fall honeys tend to be darker, thicker in consistency, and also richer in flavor, where the early honeys are very light, But I mean, if you prefer, if somebody just prefers the taste, say, of clover honey or buckwheat honey, a lot of people can't stand buckwheat honey. A lot of people love it. It's perfectly fine to buy that honey for your own use. It's just that for bees to live in a field of only one crop and nothing else really isn't to the bees' best benefit.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question here from Robin. How compatible is it to keep honeybees and also try to support native bees? I've made native bee homes and such, so have hesitated about starting honeybee keeping.
It's actually really compatible because the native bees often are feeding on something different than what the honeybees are feeding. Honeybees are generalists. They'll feed on pretty much anything that they can get their tongues into or get pollen out of. So if you plant for native bees, people say you'll also be feeding the honeybees. They don't really compete in that way with each other. They feed at different times. Like a lot of times we'll notice the native bees will go to a flower a week before you'll see the honeybees go on the flower. Or you'll see the native bumblebees going to a plant a few days before you'll see the honeybees go on there. The timing is often different of when they want to get the nectar or get the pollen from it. I think by planting for the honeybees, we've actually fed large colonies of a lot of native bees in our yard as well.
We have such a wide variety of pollinators that we see. I think that it's fair to say that we have, there's enough to go around. People have said that honeybees take away from the forage for the native bees and all, but as long as there's enough to go around, I know from what we see, we have everything. We have all types of pollinators here. And we have quite a few honeybees, of course, and I don't think they're taking anything away from anybody else.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we have a closing comment and a closing question here. Actually, a couple of people have comments, and then I'll ask the last question. So Kathy says, thank you for a great presentation. Beautiful, lots of useful information. And then Agnes, such a great presentation, lovely photos. I can't wait to start planting even more herbs now with all of this new information. And then the last question is whether you sell any of your honey.
Yes.
We do sell our honey, yes. But pretty much locally, and we pretty much just do it through word of mouth. It goes pretty fast, I have to say.
Yeah, I bet.
We have some other people around. There's another beekeeper who's a good friend of ours right up the street. He has a little bit more of a business out of it, sells at the farmer's market and all. But the demand for local honey is so great that I think everybody who has honey is able to sell it. All I have to do is, so I have a business, I have a service business, so I have people coming in and out all the time, and I just have people asking me all year long, if they have any more honey, do you have any more honey? All I need to do is post something on a local Facebook page, and then I've got people coming in and out. I just put it out in the driveway for people to come and pick up, so we don't have to advertise or put it in local stores or anything. But yes, we do sell honey. And I think we can sell every bit we can get our hands on.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot. It sounds like everybody else did too, and we're all inspired to go out and start planting and get going on some of these ideas.